The bulldozer was already on my property line when I pulled into the driveway that morning. "Stop!" I screamed, jumping out of my truck before it even fully stopped rolling. The driver looked at me like I was the trespasser, not him. "Ma'am, HOA President Karen Whitfield authorized this clearing. Your fence is coming down today. My name is Chad Marsh, and that Tuesday was the day my quiet life in Maple Hollow Estates ended. 3 years earlier, I'd bought this 2-acre corner lot with my late father's life savings. It backed up to a creek, had century oaks and a view Karen Whitfield had always wanted for herself. She lived 2 doors down in the biggest house on the street with a brass HOA president plaque on her door. Karen ran Maple Hollow like her personal kingdom, and everyone smiled and nodded because nobody wanted trouble. I was the guy who mowed on Saturdays, waved at neighbors, and never once missed an HOA dues payment. But 6 months before the bulldozer, Karen had started eyeing my back acre for a community garden. I'd said no, politely, firmly, in writing. That was my first mistake in her eyes. She smiled at the next meeting and said, "We'll see," like a queen granting a temporary reprieve. Small notices started appearing on my door. Grass too long, mailbox wrong color, trash cans out too early. I fixed every single one within hours, determined not to give her an excuse. That only made her angrier. Compliance wasn't what she wanted. Surrender was. Then came the letter claiming a decades-old shared easement, gave the HOA rights to develop my back acre. I'd never heard of any easement. My deed, recorded at the county, said nothing about it. I asked for documentation. Karen sent a blurry photocopy of a hand-annotated map and signed. Something about that map felt wrong, like it had been drawn yesterday and aged with coffee stains. I photographed every notice, every letter, every email. A habit from my old job as a claims adjuster. My neighbor Priya, who'd fought Karen before and lost, warned me. She always has a paper trick up her sleeve. I didn't listen closely enough then. I should have. At the next HOA meeting, Karen presented resident concerns about my unauthorized fence line. The fence had been there since before I bought the house. County records showed it on the original 1987 survey. Karen waived her own printed survey instead, claiming mine was outdated and legally void. Something about her confidence unsettled me, like she already knew a fight was coming and had rehearsed her lines. I started requesting official HOA meeting minutes going back 5 years, just to see the pattern. The HOA secretary, a nervous man named Doug, told me quietly that minutes were restricted to board members only. That single sentence told me everything. Karen wasn't hiding a garden plan. She was hiding something bigger. 2 weeks later, a certified letter arrived, a boundary correction notice, reducing my lot by 4,000 square feet. It cited a supposed 1994 amendment to the original plat, signed by a developer who died in 2003. I called the county recorder's office. No such amendment existed in their archive. Not one page. Karen, when confronted, simply said, "Records get lost. My copy is the real one." Her copy, not the county's. Hers. That phrase would haunt this entire fight. I hired a surveyor, David Kwan, to walk my property line with modern GPS equipment. His measurements matched my original deed exactly. Karen's correction would have handed my back acre straight to her backyard. That's when the bulldozer showed up, 3 days before I'd even scheduled to discuss it with the board. She said it was already approved. The driver repeated, checking a work order signed only K. Whitfield, President. I stood in front of my own oak trees and refused to move until my lawyer arrived. My cousin Renee, a paralegal, drove over the second I called her, cursing the whole way. "Chad, do not sign anything. Do not yell and do not let that machine touch one root," she said. The standoff lasted 4 hours. Neighbors gathered on their porches, filming on phones, whispering. Karen finally arrived in her white SUV, sunglasses on, county clipboard in hand like a general inspecting a battlefield. "This land was always meant to be community property, Chad. You just never read the fine print." "Show me the fine print," I said. The actual recorded document, not your annotated map. Her smile flickered for exactly 1 second. Caught it. Renee caught it too. I don't owe you an explanation, Karen said and ordered the driver to proceed anyway. Renee stepped in front of the bulldozer with her phone raised. That's destruction of private property on camera, ma'am. The driver, sweating, finally cut the engine. I'm not losing my license over this, he muttered and left. Karen's face went red, then composed itself into something colder. This isn't over, Chad. No, I agreed. It isn't. But I meant something very different than she did. That night I opened every folder of paperwork I owned and laid it across my kitchen table. Deed, survey, tax records, title insurance policy, the full history of my land going back 40 years. Somewhere in this pile was the truth, and Karen's confidence told me she was terrified I'd find it. I called the title insurance company that had issued my policy when I bought the house. They agreed, given the boundary dispute, to run a full historical title search at no extra cost. It would take 2 weeks. 2 weeks I'd have to survive Karen's next move. I didn't know yet that those 2 weeks would expose a fraud stretching back over a decade. And I didn't know that Karen Whitfield wasn't just an HOA bully. She was running out of time on a much older lie. Growing up, my father always said, "Paper beats yelling every single time." I never understood him until this fight. He'd been a quiet mechanic who saved every receipt, every warranty, every scrap of proof for 40 years. When he passed, he left me this land free and clear, along with his obsessive filing habits. I used to tease him about it. Now I was grateful down to my bones. The HOA had 112 households and Karen had run it for 11 consecutive years. No one ever challenged her re-election because no one else wanted the headache of the paperwork. That, I would learn, was exactly how she preferred it, invisible power dressed as thankless volunteer work. My neighbor Priya finally told me the rest of her story over coffee that week. 3 years back, Karen had forced a voluntary buyout of Priya's side lot for a retention pond. The pond was never built. The lot became Karen's personal vegetable garden within 6 months. Priya had been too exhausted, too broke from legal fees, to fight further after her first attempt. She wears people down, Priya said. That's her real weapon. Exhaustion, not law. I started keeping a locked document, time-stamped, listing every inconsistency in Karen's claims so far. Doug, the secretary, still nervous, slipped me a USB drive in the parking lot of the grocery store. I'm not a hero, he whispered. I just can't sleep anymore knowing what's on here. On the drive were 5 years of unredacted board emails Karen had assumed were permanently deleted. Inside, I found something I never expected. Emails between Karen and a man named Frank Delgado, a land developer. The emails discussed reclaiming underutilized lots for a future rezoning project worth millions. My property and Priya's original side lot were both named specifically in a spreadsheet titled Phase 1. This was never about grass height or garden plots. This was a land grab disguised as community rules. I felt sick, then furious, then strangely calm, the calm of a man who finally understood the whole board. Renee reviewed the emails and went pale. Chad, this isn't just an HOA dispute anymore. This might be fraud. We needed the title search results to confirm one crucial detail before going further. Did Karen actually have any legitimate legal claim buried somewhere? Or was it built on nothing at all? 3 days before the results were due, Karen escalated again, this time publicly at a board meeting. She stood before all 112 households and announced I was violating community trust. She claimed I'd assaulted a contractor during the Bulldozer incident, twisting the standoff completely. Several neighbors gasped. A few, loyal to Karen for years, nodded along without question. I stood up calmly and said, I have video of that entire afternoon. Would you like me to play it? The room went silent. Karen's smile didn't move, but her knuckles went white on the podium. That won't be necessary, she said quickly and moved on to the next agenda item. But the seed was planted. A few neighbors lingered after the meeting, asking quiet questions. One elderly resident, Mr. Alvarez, pulled me aside. She did something similar to the Hendersons in 2019. The Hendersons had moved away suddenly, selling at a steep loss after a nearly identical land dispute. A pattern was forming, and patterns, unlike arguments, could be proven in court. I began compiling a timeline. Hendersons in 2019, Priya in 2021, me in 2024, always land near the creek. That creek frontage, I realized, was the actual prize. Karen wasn't collecting grievances. She was collecting acreage. The following morning, an email arrived from the title company. Subject line, preliminary findings. Please call immediately. My hands were shaking as I dialed the number back. Mr. Marsh, the title officer said carefully, we found something you need to see in person. I drove to their office that same afternoon. Renee beside me, both of us silent the whole ride. The title officer spread 3 documents across the table like a dealer laying out cards. Your deed is completely clean. Every transfer since 1987 is properly recorded. There is no easement. Relief flooded me until she slid the 4th document forward. But we found something else while searching adjacent parcels. Something involving your HOA president. 12 years ago, Karen Whitfield hadn't inherited her house. She'd forged a quitclaim deed to obtain it. The real owner, an elderly widow named Ruth Callahan, had supposedly gifted the property before moving to assisted living. Except Ruth Callahan's actual signature, on file from a 1998 refinance, did not match the quitclaim deed at all. This wasn't in your file by coincidence, the officer explained. Your parcel and hers share a boundary history. Karen Whitfield's entire empire in Maple Hollow may have started with forging an old woman's signature. I sat back in my chair, stunned. This was no longer about my fence line. This was about everything. Is Ruth Callahan still alive? I asked, my voice barely steady. The officer checked the state database. According to records, yes. Assisted living facility, 40 minutes from here. Renee and I looked at each other. We both knew exactly what we had to do next. But confronting Karen too soon would only give her time to bury more evidence. Or worse, destroy it. We needed a plan, quiet, methodical, and airtight, the way my father had taught me to build a case. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table redrawing the entire timeline of lies. Somewhere in Maple Hollow, an elderly woman's stolen home had funded 11 years of tyranny. And somewhere inside me, the nervous, conflict-avoidant man I used to be quietly disappeared. What replaced him wasn't rage. It was patience, the coldest, most dangerous kind. Renee and I drove to Sunrise Meadows assisted living on a gray Thursday morning, unannounced. Ruth Callahan was 91 years old, sharp-eyed and surprised anyone remembered her at all. You knew my house? On Hollow Creek Lane? She asked, gripping my hand tightly. I never signed anything giving that place away, she said. My daughter handles my paperwork. She'd have told me. We showed her the quitclaim deed. Her hands trembled as she studied the signature. That's not how I write my R, she said firmly. I've signed my name the same way for 70 years. A licensed handwriting expert, hired the next day, confirmed it within an hour. The signature was a forgery. Ruth's daughter, Marion, was horrified. We thought Mom sold the house in a private sale. We never saw paperwork. Marion had power of attorney records showing she'd never authorized any transfer to Karen Whitfield at all. This wasn't a legal loophole Karen had exploited. This was a criminal act over a decade old. Renee began quietly filing a formal title fraud complaint with the county recorder's office. Meanwhile, Karen escalated her campaign against me, unaware the ground beneath her was already cracking. She sent a final notice demanding I remove my fence within 7 days or face a $5,000 fine. I didn't argue. I simply smiled and said, understood, which seemed to unsettle her more than any argument would have. That weekend, at the community picnic, Karen made a show of generously waiving fines for 2 loyal neighbors. It was classic Karen. Punish the defiant, reward the obedient, and let everyone see the difference. I mingled that afternoon, quietly asking longtime residents if they remembered Ruth Callahan's sudden move years ago. An older man named Pete recalled it clearly. One day she was there. Next month Karen had new curtains up. No moving truck, no goodbye party, nothing. Just an abrupt, quiet disappearance from the neighborhood. Every new detail confirmed what we already suspected. Karen had been doing this long before my back acre. We learned Frank Delgado, the developer from the emails, had quietly bought 3 lots near the creek since 2019. Each purchase happened right after a resident had a sudden, urgent reason to sell below market value. Karen wasn't just abusing HOA power. She was running a small, brutal real estate pipeline. I brought everything, the emails, the forged deed, Ruth's testimony, to a real estate fraud attorney, Marcus Webb. He read through the folder in silence for nearly 20 minutes before looking up. "Mr. Marsh, this is one of the cleanest fraud cases I've seen in 15 years of practice. But we need to be careful. If she suspects we're building a case, she'll destroy records fast." Marcus suggested we let Karen escalate her fence dispute publicly, giving us legal cover to subpoena HOA financial records. We needed one official complaint that gave a judge reason to demand everything: bank statements, meeting minutes, contracts. My fence violation, ironically, would become the crack that split the entire dam wide open. I attended the next HOA meeting and calmly, formally requested a full financial audit of the association. Karen laughed it off. "Residents don't get to demand audits, Chad. That's not how governance works." "Actually," Renee said, standing beside me with a folder of state HOA statutes, "residents absolutely do." She cited the exact code section requiring an audit if 15% of homeowners petitioned for one. We already had signatures from Priya, Pete, Mr. Alvarez, and 11 others quietly gathered over 2 weeks. Karen's composure cracked for the first time in public. "This is harassment," she snapped into the microphone. "No," I said. "This is oversight. Something Maple Hollow hasn't had in 11 years." The room buzzed with murmurs. A dozen neighbors who'd stayed silent for years suddenly leaned forward, listening. Karen tried to adjourn the meeting early. The board vice president, visibly uncomfortable, refused to second the motion. For the first time, I watched her control of the room slip through her fingers in real time. The judge granted the audit petition within a week, citing clear statutory grounds and the forgery complaint already filed. A forensic accountant hired by the court began combing through 11 years of HOA bank statements. Karen, meanwhile, tried a new tactic: sympathy. She told neighbors she was being targeted for being a strong woman. A few longtime supporters rallied around her, organizing a small Support Karen petition of their own. It gained exactly 9 signatures. My audit petition had gathered 14 in half the time. Then Doug, the nervous secretary, finally agreed to speak on record about the missing meeting minutes. She told me to shred anything mentioning Phase 1 or Delgado if anyone from outside ever asked, he admitted. Destruction of records on top of forgery on top of fraud. The case was building like a wave. Marion, Ruth's daughter, filed a separate civil suit demanding the house be returned to her mother's estate. News of the forged deed spread through Maple Hollow like wildfire, whispered between mailboxes and driveways. Karen's smile in public grew tighter, more brittle, more rehearsed with every passing day. I started receiving strange, anonymous calls late at night. Heavy breathing, then silence, then a click. Renee insisted I install security cameras. 2 nights later, footage caught someone circling my property at 2 a.m. The figure paused at my fence, photographed it, then left without ever stepping onto my land. We couldn't prove it was Karen, but the timing right after the audit approval told its own story. The forensic accountant's preliminary report arrived 4 weeks later, and it was worse than anyone imagined. Over $300,000 in HOA reserve funds had been funneled through a shell company since 2019. The shell company's registered agent was none other than Frank Delgado, the land developer. HOA dues meant for pool maintenance and street repairs had quietly bankrolled Karen's real estate ambitions. We finally had enough. Fraud, forgery, embezzlement, and a decade-long pattern of quiet, calculated cruelty. Marcus Webb requested an emergency board meeting to formally present the forensic audit findings to all residents. Karen tried to block it, citing procedural concerns, but the vice president overruled her for the first time ever. The night of the meeting, the community clubhouse was packed beyond capacity. Every household, it seemed, had shown up. Karen arrived in a cream-colored suit, composed, rehearsed, ready to spin whatever came next. Marcus stood at the podium and calmly began reading the forensic accountant's summary aloud. $312,000 diverted since 2019. Recipient: a shell company tied to Frank Delgado. Gasps rippled through the room. Karen's hand tightened on her water glass, but her face stayed eerily still. "This is a coordinated smear campaign," Karen said, standing abruptly. "Chad Marsh has a personal vendetta against me." "Then explain Ruth Callahan's forged signature," I said, sliding the handwriting expert's report across the table toward her. For the first time in 11 years, Karen Whitfield had absolutely nothing rehearsed to say. The silence stretched for nearly 10 full seconds before she finally spoke, voice suddenly smaller. "I can explain everything," she said. "It's not what it looks like." "Then explain it," said Mr. Alvarez, standing up from the crowd. "To the county prosecutor, not to us." A murmur of agreement rolled through the room like thunder finally breaking after a long, dry storm. Karen's longtime allies, the ones who'd signed her Support Karen petition, quietly slid their copies under their chairs. Doug stood up next, visibly shaking, and confirmed on record that Karen had ordered him to shred documents. "I have text messages," he said, holding up his phone. "I saved everything, just in case." The messages, projected onto the clubhouse screen, showed Karen explicitly instructing him to make Phase 1 disappear. Karen's face finally cracked entirely. Not into remorse, but into raw, cornered panic. "You people have no idea how much work I've put into this neighborhood," she shouted, her composure gone. "You made this neighborhood worse," Priya said quietly. "One stolen lot at a time." Karen turned to leave, but 2 uniformed county sheriff's deputies were already waiting at the clubhouse door. They'd been called earlier that evening by Marcus, coordinating quietly with the district attorney's office. "Karen Whitfield," one deputy said, "we need you to come with us regarding a title fraud investigation." The room fell into stunned, total silence as she was escorted, still protesting, out of her own kingdom. I felt no joy watching it happen. Only a strange, hollow exhaustion after months of quiet warfare. Renee squeezed my shoulder. "It's over, Chad. It's actually over." But I knew, deep down, the legal process was only just beginning. The following weeks brought a flood of new information as investigators dug deeper into Karen's decade of control. Frank Delgado was arrested in a neighboring county, attempting to quietly liquidate assets tied to the shell company. He immediately began cooperating with prosecutors, hoping to reduce his own sentence for wire fraud. His testimony confirmed everything the email suggested. Karen had orchestrated the forged deed on Ruth Callahan's home herself. She'd used her HOA position to identify vulnerable, elderly, or financially struggling homeowners near the creek. Then she'd pressured, forged, or exhausted them into giving up their land, one quiet case at a time. The Hendersons, tracked down in another state, confirmed a nearly identical pattern of harassment before their sudden sale. Priya's original lot, taken under the retention pond excuse, was formally returned to her by court order. Ruth Callahan's home was restored to her family's estate, with Karen ordered to pay full restitution. My own fence dispute, the thing that started it all, was dismissed within minutes at a preliminary hearing. The judge noted, almost amused, that my survey had been accurate the entire time. Karen was formally charged with forgery, embezzlement, wire fraud, and obstruction of justice. Bail was set high, given the flight risk suggested by Frank Delgado's own attempted asset liquidation. The HOA board, restructured under court supervision, elected Mr. Alvarez as interim president within the month. His first official act was authorizing full transparency. Every financial record, publicly available to any resident who asked. Doug, who'd risked everything to speak up, was thanked publicly and later voted onto the new, reformed board. I finally rebuilt my fence exactly where it had always legally stood, using cedar posts my father would have loved. Priya planted new trees where her stolen lot had been, right where Karen's vegetable garden once stood. Ruth Callahan, from her assisted living room, told a local reporter, "Justice found me later than I expected, but it found me." The trial, 6 months later, ended in a plea deal. Karen pled guilty to avoid a maximum sentence at trial. She received 4 years in state prison and was ordered to pay over $500,000 in restitution. Frank Delgado received a lighter sentence for cooperating, along with a permanent ban from real estate licensing. I sat in the courtroom the day of sentencing, watching the woman who once threatened me with bulldozers stand silent. She looked smaller somehow, stripped of her clipboard, her plaque, her rehearsed smile, her entire kingdom. As deputies led her out, she caught my eye for one brief second across the courtroom. There was no apology in that look, just the quiet, cold understanding that she had finally lost. Maple Hollow held its first genuinely open election in over a decade and Priya ran for board secretary. She won by a landslide, promising exactly what the neighborhood had been missing: honesty and nothing more. I still live on that same corner lot, oaks intact, creek flowing exactly where it always did. Some nights I still can't quite believe one bulldozer and one stubborn refusal to back down unraveled all of it. My father always said paper beats yelling. He never got to see it, but he was right about everything. Maple Hollow is quiet again now, not the fearful quiet of before, but the peaceful kind, finally earned.